The words cut through me like a knife, his laughter echoing in the conference room long after everyone else had fallen silent. "You're too old to start over, Catherine. Maybe 15 years ago, but at 53? Be realistic. James Mitchell, my boss of 12 years, didn't even have the decency to dismiss me in private." I sat frozen, my resignation letter still on the table between us. After dedicating over a decade of my life to Mitchell Media Solutions, I'd finally gathered the courage to pursue my own vision. I wasn't asking for his blessing, just professional courtesy. Instead, I got public humiliation. The weight of 20 pairs of eyes pressed against my skin as colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The quarterly staff meeting had derailed into my personal nightmare. My hands trembled slightly beneath the table, but I forced my face to remain composed. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "I appreciate your concern, James," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I've made my decision." I stood, smoothed my pencil skirt, and gathered my papers. "I'll work through my notice period, of course." James leaned back in his chair, that smug smile still playing on his lips. At 42, he'd inherited the company from his father 5 years ago. Under his leadership, we'd shifted from thoughtful, creative marketing to cookie-cutter campaigns that prioritized quick profits over client relationships. The company was making money, but losing its soul and its most loyal clients. 2 weeks then," he said dismissively, already turning his attention to his phone. "HR will handle the details." I walked out with my head high, though my legs felt disconnected from my body. In the hallway, my assistant Zoe fell into step beside me, her eyes wide with concern. "He's wrong, you know," she whispered once we were safely in my office. "About all of it." I sank into my chair, finally allowing myself to exhale. "Is he? The marketing landscape has completely transformed in the last 5 years alone. I've barely kept up with the changes while working here, starting my own agency now." Zoe planted both hands on my desk and leaned forward. "Who rebuilt the Carson account after James nearly tanked it? Who kept Westfield Industries when they were ready to walk? Who mentored every decent copywriter in this building?" Her voice rose with each question. "You didn't just keep up with changes, Kath. You anticipated them." I smiled at her loyalty. At 28, Zoe represented everything I loved about working with younger talent: her energy, her fresh perspective, her unwillingness to accept the limitations others imposed. We'd grown close over the 3 years she'd worked as my assistant, moving well beyond the typical boss-employee relationship. "Thanks, Zoe. But there's a difference between performing well within an established company and building something from nothing. Then it's a good thing you're not starting from nothing." She pulled out her phone and showed me an email she'd drafted to herself. It contained a list of names our clients, specifically the ones I had personal relationships with. "Zoe, I can't poach clients. My contract has a non-compete clause." "For approaching them directly, yes," she said with a sly smile. "But there's nothing that says they can't approach you once you're gone." I shook my head, though I couldn't help but feel a flutter of possibility. "It's still unethical." "What's unethical is how James has been treating these relationships like ATMs instead of partnerships." She crossed her arms. "They deserve to know they have options." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked diligently to transition my projects. I documented processes, updated client files, and trained junior staff members to take over my accounts. If James noticed my thoroughness, he didn't comment on it. He'd already moved on, as if my departure was insignificant. On my last day, I cleaned out my office while most of the staff was at lunch. I preferred it that way, no awkward goodbyes or pitying glances. As I placed the last of my belongings in a cardboard box, I heard a knock at my door. Robert Chin, our CFO, stood in the doorway. Unlike most of the executive team, who were James's college friends or family connections, Robert had earned his position through decades of financial expertise. "Got a minute?" he asked, closing the door behind him. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. James's desk now, I supposed. Of course. Robert sat down heavily. At 62, he was the oldest member of the executive team and the only one who remembered when James's father had run the company with integrity and vision. I wanted to check your calculations one last time, he said, sliding a folder across to me. I frowned in confusion. My calculations for your departure package. He tapped the folder meaningfully. The projections you worked up. Understanding dawned slowly. I opened the folder to find financial projections for a new marketing agency, startup costs, operating expenses, revenue forecasts. But I hadn't created these. These aren't mine, I said. Robert's eyes twinkled. Check the client acquisition estimates on page 3. I flipped to the page and felt my breath catch. It listed 10 of our biggest clients, the same ones from Zoe's email, with conservative estimates of what their accounts might be worth to a new agency. Next to each was a note about their current satisfaction level with Mitchell Media. Most were marked at risk or considering options. How did you? I'm the CFO, Catherine. It's my job to know which clients are profitable and which are flight risks. He leaned forward. James doesn't see it because he doesn't want to. He thinks clients stay because of the company name, not because of relationships. I closed the folder, my heart racing. Even if these clients are unhappy, there's still the matter of my non-compete. Ah, yes, about that. Robert pulled another document from his jacket pocket. The non-compete that James's father had employees sign is quite different from the one James implemented last year. But I signed a new contract when he took over. Robert shook his head. You were on vacation when the new contracts went out. When you returned, HR was in transition, and it fell through the cracks. Your original contract from 12 years ago is still what's on file. He handed me the document, a copy of my original employment agreement from when I joined the company. And the non-compete in this version? I asked, already scanning the pages. 6 months, geographic restriction of 50 miles, and, most importantly, it only applies to clients you personally didn't work with. He smiled. James's father believed that if a client chose to follow an employee who left, it was because the company had failed that client, not because the employee had stolen them. The implications washed over me in waves. Under these terms, I could start my own agency immediately. I could work with any client I'd personally managed, which included almost all of our major accounts. Why are you showing me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because I believe in what this company used to stand for, Robert said simply. And I think you do too. He stood up and straightened his tie. Besides, I'm retiring next year. I'd like to consult for a company with a future, not one circling the drain. After Robert left, I sat in stunned silence. The path forward had suddenly cleared, revealing possibilities I'd been too cautious to consider. That evening, as I carried my box of belongings to my car, I noticed Zoe waiting beside it. She was supposed to be at a client meeting with James. Shouldn't you be at the Westfield presentation? I asked. James went alone. Said he didn't need junior staff for important client meetings anymore. She rolled her eyes. He's going to crash and burn. Westfield specifically requested I be there since I've worked on their campaigns. A familiar frustration rose in my chest. This was exactly why I decided to leave James's inability to value the human elements of our business. His dismissal of collaborative relationships in favor of his own ego. I'm sorry, Zoe. That's not fair to you. She shrugged. It's fine. Actually, it's perfect timing because I wanted to talk to you. She took a deep breath. I'm giving my notice tomorrow. Oh, the simple statement shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Are you going to Palmer and Associates? Our main competitor had been recruiting aggressively. No. She fidgeted with her phone case. I was hoping I could come work for you. I blinked. I don't have a company yet, Zoe. But you will. Her certainty was unwavering. "And when you do, I want to be your first employee. Not as your assistant, though I'll do that too if needed, but as your digital marketing specialist." "I can't afford—" "I've been taking night classes in digital marketing for the past year," she interrupted. "And I've been managing 3 freelance clients on the side. I know what I'm worth, and I'm willing to take a pay cut to help build something meaningful." I studied her face, seeing not just hope, but confidence. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. "Let me think about it," I said finally, "and maybe buy you dinner to discuss it properly." "Deal." She grinned. "I've already drafted a business plan. I'll bring it with me." Over Thai food that evening, Zoe laid out her vision. She didn't just want to be an employee. She wanted to be a partner, junior at first, with a path to equality as the business grew. She'd been contemplating her own exit strategy for months and had resources I hadn't considered. Relationships with freelance designers, a network of social media specialists, connections to potential clients beyond Mitchell Media. "The industry is changing," she explained between bites of pad thai. "Traditional agencies are struggling to adapt. But a boutique firm that combines your strategic expertise with cutting-edge digital capabilities? We'd carve out a niche that neither the dinosaurs nor the tech-only shops can fill." Her enthusiasm was infectious, her logic sound. By the time we finished our coffee, I had agreed to her proposition. We would start small, working from my home office, taking only clients we could reasonably service, growing organically rather than chasing rapid expansion. "To new beginnings," Zoe said, raising her cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my cup against hers, "at the ripe old age of 53. We laughed, and for the first time since James had dismissed my ambitions, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The next morning, I created a simple website for Catherine Hayes Consulting. By afternoon, I'd registered the business with the state and opened a business bank account. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating to see my name on the paperwork, to claim ownership of my professional future. I'd expected to spend weeks, maybe months, slowly building a client base. I'd prepared for the lean startup Period Roberts' projections had warned about. What I hadn't anticipated was the phone call I received 3 days after leaving Mitchell Media. "Catherine, it's Diane Westfield." My heart skipped. Diane was the marketing director at Westfield Industries, one of Mitchell Media's largest clients, or rather, one of the clients James had been supposed to meet with on my last day. "Diane, how are you?" I kept my tone professionally neutral despite my surprise. "I've been better." Her voice was tight with frustration. "I just sat through the most insulting presentation of my career." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you? Because apparently, according to James Mitchell, you abandoned ship without any transition plan for our account." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's absolutely false. I spent my entire notice period creating detailed transition documents, including specific notes for your upcoming campaign." "That's what I thought," Diane said, her tone softening slightly. "We've worked together for what? 7 years now. You've never been anything but thorough." 8 years, I corrected gently. "Since before you were promoted to director." "Right." She paused. "The thing is, Catherine," James came in completely unprepared. He couldn't answer basic questions about our brand positioning. When I asked about the market research we'd commissioned, he brushed it off as unnecessary details. Then he had the nerve to propose raising our retainer by 30% for enhanced executive oversight. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. James had never bothered to understand what clients like Westfield actually valued. "I'm sorry you had that experience," I said carefully. "I'm sure once the new team gets up to speed—" "That's why I'm calling," Diane interrupted. "We're not interested in a new team. The board has authorized me to terminate our contract with Mitchell Media, effective immediately." My breath caught. "Diane, and we'd like to bring our business to you." The words hung in the air between us. This was exactly the situation my non-compete was designed to prevent. "I'm flattered," I said slowly, "but I've only just started my consultancy. I'm not sure I have the capacity." "We don't need a full-service agency right now," Diane said. "What we need is someone who understands our brand and can develop a coherent strategy. We can handle execution in-house or work with specialists you recommend." She paused. "Unless you're not interested." "It's not that." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I have a non-compete agreement with Mitchell Media. While the terms are more favorable than I initially thought, I need to be careful about how I proceed." Diane's laugh surprised me. "Catherine, our legal team reviewed your non-compete years ago when we considered trying to hire you directly. Under its terms, if we approach you, which we are, and if you didn't solicit our business, which you didn't, there's no violation." "You researched my non-compete." "Of course we did. Do you think we'd invest millions in campaigns without understanding the stability of our key relationships?" I could hear the smile in her voice. "We value what you bring to the table, Catherine. We always have." By the end of the call, I had my first client, one whose retainer alone would cover my basic operating expenses. By the end of the week, I had 3 more, all former Mitchell Media clients who had, coincidentally, decided to seek new marketing partners. Zoe joined me as planned, turning my guest bedroom into a functional office space. We developed systems, divided responsibilities, and began building something that reflected our shared values. Transparency with clients, creativity grounded in strategy, respect for both data and human intuition. 1 month turned into 3, then 6. We added 2 more team members, a graphic designer Zoe had worked with and a content strategist I'd mentored years earlier. We moved operations from my home to a small but stylish office space. Our client roster grew steadily, mostly through referrals and word of mouth. I avoided mentioning Mitchell Media in our marketing materials or client conversations. This wasn't about revenge or competition. It was about creating something true to my own vision. Still, I couldn't help hearing occasional updates through industry channels. "Did you see Mitchell's new campaign for Suntech?" my content strategist asked one afternoon. "It's almost identical to what Palmer released last quarter." "They lost the Greenwood account," our designer mentioned another day. "Apparently, they missed 3 deadlines in a row." Each story reinforced what I already suspected. Without strong client relationships and creative leadership, Mitchell Media was floundering. James had inherited a strong company with loyal clients and talented staff. His father had built a culture where both employees and clients felt valued. James had systematically dismantled that culture in favor of short-term gains and his own ego. I took no pleasure in hearing about their struggles. Too many good people still worked there, people who deserved better leadership and more stable employment. At the 9-month mark, Robert Chin called me. "How's retirement treating you?" I asked, genuinely pleased to hear from him. "About that," he said, his tone serious. "I haven't retired yet." "No? I thought you were set on fishing and spoiling grandchildren. The board asked me to delay my plans." He cleared his throat. "Things at Mitchell aren't going well, Catherine." I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent an unexpected pang through me. Despite everything, I had spent 12 years of my life at that company. I cared about what happened to it. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "The problem is cash flow," Robert continued. "We've lost 40% of our client base in the past 6 months. Some followed you, which we expected, but others simply left because the quality of work declined or because James alienated them. That's unfortunate, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." He sighed heavily. "The company needs an infusion of capital and new leadership. The board is preparing to remove James, but they're concerned about finding a buyer in the current state." Understanding dawned slowly. "Are you suggesting? Would you consider acquiring Mitchell Media?" The question was direct, his tone matter of fact. The name still has value in the market. The remaining client base, while diminished, is still significant, and there are good people there who would thrive under the right leadership. My mind raced with implications. The company that had once dismissed me as too old to start over was now potentially within my reach. It was a stunning reversal, one I'd never anticipated when I'd walked out with my box of belongings. "What about James?" I asked. "He would be removed as CEO regardless. The board has lost confidence in his leadership. And the asking price—" Robert named a figure that would have been impossible for me 9 months ago. Now, with our growing client base and the investment offer Zoe had secured from a former colleague, it was within reach, ambitious but achievable. "I need to think about it," I said finally, "and discuss it with my team." "Of course," Robert replied, "but don't take too long. The situation is deteriorating quickly." That evening, I called an emergency meeting with my core team, now 6 strong. I presented Robert's proposal without embellishment, laying out both the opportunity and the risks. It would accelerate our growth substantially, I concluded, but it would also fundamentally change the company we've been building. I won't make this decision unilaterally. The discussion lasted hours, with perspectives ranging from enthusiastic to deeply cautious. Zoe, surprisingly, was among the most hesitant. "We've created something special here," she argued. "Something authentic that clients respond to. I'm worried about diluting that by absorbing a struggling larger agency with its own culture and problems." It was a valid concern, one that resonated with my own reservations. By midnight, we had reached a tentative consensus. We would explore the acquisition, but only on terms that preserved our values and vision. The next day, I called Robert back. "We're interested, but we have conditions." "I expected nothing less," he said. "Name them." "First, we want complete autonomy in restructuring. No interference from the board on personnel decisions or strategic direction. Reasonable. Second, we want to review all current contracts and client relationships in detail before finalizing any agreement. Also reasonable. Third, I took a deep breath. We want a significant reduction in the asking price with performance-based earnouts to make up the difference over time." There was a pause. That may be harder to sell to the board. "It reflects the reality of what we're taking on, Robert. We're not just acquiring assets. We're assuming the responsibility of rebuilding a damaged brand and stabilizing a business in decline." He conceded the point, and over the next several weeks, our teams worked through due diligence and negotiations. The more we learned about Mitchell Media's current state, the more evident it became that James had been even more destructive than we'd realized. Client contracts had been altered to prioritize short-term billing over long-term relationships. Talented staff had been marginalized or pushed out. The creative process had been reduced to templates and formulas. Yet beneath the damage, the bones of a good company remained. There were still dedicated employees doing their best within a dysfunctional system. There were still clients who stayed out of loyalty to those employees. There was still value in the history and reputation that predated James's leadership. The final agreement came together faster than I'd anticipated. The board, increasingly desperate as financials worsened, accepted our terms with minimal pushback. By the 1-year anniversary of my departure from Mitchell Media, I was signing papers to acquire it. James, as Robert had predicted, was removed as CEO by the board before the acquisition finalized. He didn't go quietly, threatening lawsuits and publicly dismissing the sale as a desperate move by a failing board. The business press caught wind of the story, a former executive returning to buy out the company she'd left a year earlier. Most coverage focused on the business angle, but one profile in an industry publication captured a detail that made me smile. Mitchell Media, now Hayes Strategic Partners, represents a rare example of corporate renewal through leadership that values experience over youth, relationships over transactions, and long-term vision over quarterly gains. On the day we announced the acquisition to the Mitchell Media staff, I stood at the front of the same conference room where James had laughed at my ambitions 12 months earlier. The faces looking back at me showed a range of emotions: hope, skepticism, fear, curiosity. "A year ago, I sat where you're sitting now," I began. "I had decided to leave because I no longer believed in the direction of this company. Today, I'm here because I believe in what it can become again." I outlined our vision honestly, acknowledging that there would be changes. Some positions might be eliminated, others created or reimagined. We would assess skills and potential rather than titles or tenure. We would rebuild client relationships based on value and trust. "This isn't about restoring the past," I emphasized. "It's about creating a future that honors what was best about this company while embracing new approaches and perspectives." As the meeting ended and people began to file out, a woman in her early 60s approached me. I recognized her as the office manager who had been with the company since its founding. "I wasn't sure I'd last another month here," she said quietly. "Now I'm thinking I might postpone my retirement a bit longer." I smiled. "I'm glad to hear it. It seems neither of us was quite ready to be put out to pasture." She laughed, a genuine sound that echoed in the now empty conference room. Age and experience still count for something after all. "They always did," I replied. "Some people just needed a reminder." Later that day, as Zoe and I toured what was now our expanded office space, she stopped in front of what had been James's corner office. "So," she said with a mischievous smile, "are you taking the big office now?" I considered the space, ostentatious, isolated from the team, designed to intimidate rather than collaborate. "Actually," I said, "I think we should turn it into a creative lounge for the team. Something bright and energizing where people can brainstorm and collaborate." Zoe nodded approvingly. "Perfect. Where will you set up?" "I thought we'd take down the wall between the two offices at the center of the floor. Create a shared leadership space where we're accessible to everyone." "We?" she asked, her eyebrow raised. "Well, you are my partner now. The paperwork went through with the acquisition financing." Her eyes widened. "You didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now." I smiled. 30% equity as we discussed. "You earned it, Zoe." She blinked rapidly, emotion washing over her face. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me build something we can both be proud of." She nodded, composing herself. I already was, but now. She looked around at what we'd acquired, what we'd built, what still lay ahead. "Now we get to show everyone what happens when different generations work together instead of competing." I thought about James, about his dismissive laughter, about his belief that age defined potential. I thought about how his limited vision had cost him not just his position, but the legacy his father had entrusted to him. "You know," I said as we walked back toward the main office area, "in a strange way, I should thank him." "Who?" "James." I smiled at her confusion. If he hadn't been so publicly dismissive that day, I might have left quietly, started small, stayed cautious. Zoe laughed. "So what you're saying is his biggest mistake was underestimating a woman with something to prove." "That," I agreed, "and forgetting that some things actually do improve with age." The integration of Mitchell Media into Hayes Strategic Partners wasn't smooth. I hadn't expected it to be. Merging two distinct cultures, especially when one had been shaped by dysfunction, required patience, clear communication, and sometimes difficult decisions. The first month was the hardest. Some Mitchell employees viewed us as invaders rather than saviors. Others expected instant transformation, as if decades of institutional habits could be rewired overnight. My team, proud of the culture we'd built from scratch, struggled to adapt to the larger organization with its established hierarchies and processes. "We need to be patient," I reminded Zoe during a particularly challenging week. "Cultural change is measured in months and years, not days." She nodded, though frustration lined her face. "I know. I just didn't expect so much resistance to ideas that clearly benefit everyone. The resistance came in many forms: passive compliance without real buy-in, subtle undermining of new initiatives, quiet exodus of those who preferred the old way of doing things, even if that way was failing, and one particularly vocal critic, Thomas Ellison, James's former second-in-command and the person who'd been most upset by my return. Catherine's approach is a regression to outdated methods, he announced during a strategy meeting, not bothering to address me directly, though I sat at the same table. Clients today want efficiency and measurable ROI, not hand-holding and endless strategy sessions. The room fell silent. In our first 6 weeks, I'd focused on rebuilding relationships rather than asserting authority. I'd encouraged open dialogue, even dissent. But Thomas had crossed the line from constructive criticism to deliberate sabotage. "Thomas," I said evenly, "your perspective is valued. But characterizing client relationship development as hand-holding suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of what drives client retention." He smirked. "The numbers don't lie. Under James's leadership, our billing efficiency increased 28%, while client retention dropped by 40% in the same period," I countered. "A business model that prioritizes extracting maximum revenue from clients in minimum time isn't sustainable. The evidence is in the company's near collapse." Several heads nodded around the table. Thomas had few allies left. Most had departed with James or been let go during our initial restructuring. But his attitude represented a philosophy that had permeated the company: short-term thinking over long-term relationships. "If you disagree with the direction," I continued, "that's your right. But undermining it isn't an option. We need alignment, especially at the leadership level." "Or what?" he challenged. "You'll fire me too?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'd prefer not to. You have valuable skills and institutional knowledge. But make no mistake, this isn't a democracy when it comes to our core values. Client relationships and quality work come first. That's non-negotiable." The confrontation marked a turning point. Thomas submitted his resignation the following week, taking 2 junior account managers with him. Their departure, while uncomfortable in the moment, ultimately accelerated our transformation. Without daily resistance from within, we could focus on rebuilding rather than defending our approach. 3 months into the acquisition, we began seeing measurable improvements. Client feedback grew more positive. Employee surveys showed increasing engagement. Our financial situation, while still precarious, had stabilized enough to begin reinvesting in talent development and creative resources. "We should celebrate these wins," Zoe suggested during our weekly leadership meeting. "Even the small ones." She was right. In focusing on the challenges, I'd overlooked the importance of acknowledging progress. The next day, we hosted an impromptu gathering with pizza and champagne to recognize the team's efforts. As I looked around the room at the mix of original Hayes employees and former Mitchell staff, now working together, I felt the first real sense that we were becoming one company. Maria Chin, Robert's daughter and our new creative director, clinked her glass against mine. "Dad says you're exceeding projections." I smiled. Robert had officially retired, but remained a valuable advisor and sounding board. "Don't tell him I said this, but his projections were deliberately conservative." She laughed. "Of course they were. He wanted to make sure you'd overdeliver." Her expression turned thoughtful. "He also said something interesting last week. He said James did you a favor." "A favor?" I raised an eyebrow. "By pushing you out the way he did." She shrugged. "Dad thinks if he'd been smarter, if he'd recognized your value and treated you fairly, you'd still be here working for him instead of owning the place." The observation struck me as both insightful and unsettling. In a twisted way, James's greatest mistake had been underestimating me so dramatically that he forced me to prove him wrong. "There's probably some truth to that," I admitted. although I'd been considering striking out on my own for years. James just provided the final push. And look what happened. Maria gestured around the office. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Her words lingered with me long after the celebration ended. I'd spent considerable energy angry at James for his dismissal of my abilities, for his destruction of what had once been a good company, for the harm he'd caused employees and clients alike. But that anger was becoming less useful, less necessary to fuel my determination. The 6-month mark brought our first significant new client win as a unified company. Pinnacle Innovations, a tech firm that had previously been out of reach for both Hayes and Mitchell separately, signed a 2-year contract for comprehensive marketing services. Their CEO cited our unique blend of strategic depth and digital innovation as the deciding factor, a direct validation of what Zoe and I had envisioned when we first combined our strengths. The win energized the entire team and silenced lingering doubts about our direction. It also attracted attention within the industry. Trade publications ran features on our remarkable turnaround. Former employees reached out about returning. Competitors began mimicking elements of our approach in their own marketing. "We've become the case study everyone's talking about," Zoe said one evening as we reviewed the latest industry newsletter. "The question is, what's our next chapter?" It was a good question. We'd stabilized the business, retained key talents, rebuilt client relationships, and begun attracting new opportunities. The immediate crisis had passed. Now we needed a vision beyond survival. Expansion. I suggested. "We've had inquiries about opening a West Coast office." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "That's one option. Or we could deepen our expertise in emerging technologies, AI, immersive media." "Why choose?" Maria joined our conversation, setting down a stack of creative briefs. "Regional expansion gives us access to new talent pools and industry sectors. Technological depth keeps us ahead of the curve. We need both." She was right, of course. The question wasn't which direction to grow, but how to grow thoughtfully, maintaining our culture and quality while extending our reach. As we developed our expansion strategy, an unexpected email arrived in my inbox. The sender, James Mitchell. After 9 months of silence following his removal as CEO, his message was brief and direct. "We should talk. Coffee next week? Your choice of location." I stared at the screen, memories of his dismissive laughter echoing in my mind. My finger hovered over the delete button. "Everything okay?" Zoe asked, noticing my expression. I turned the screen toward her. She read the message, her eyebrows rising. "Are you going to meet him?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "What could he possibly have to say that I need to hear?" "Maybe nothing," she said with a shrug. "But you won't know unless you go." She was right. Despite everything, I was curious. Had James gained any self-awareness in the months since his fall? Did he recognize the damage his leadership had caused? Or was this some attempt at justification or even revenge? I replied with a time and place. A quiet cafe far from our office, neutral territory where we wouldn't be observed by anyone from the industry. The following Tuesday, I arrived 10 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance. James arrived precisely on time, looking noticeably different from when I'd last seen him. The designer suits and carefully maintained appearance had given way to casual clothes and a slight dishevelment that suggested diminished resources or concern. "Catherine," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I shook it briefly, noting his firm grip hadn't changed. "James, what can I do for you?" After ordering coffee, he sat across from me, his fingers drumming lightly on the table's edge, a nervous habit I remembered from board meetings. "I've been doing some consulting," he began, "helping smaller agencies with operational efficiency." I nodded, but said nothing, waiting for him to reach his point. "It's given me perspective," he continued, "about what happened at Mitchell, about my role in it. Still, I waited. He sighed, abandoning his attempt at small talk. I owe you an apology, Catherine. What I said that day in the conference room, about you being too old to start over, it was cruel and wrong. I'm sorry. The words seemed genuine, his discomfort evident, yet something felt incomplete about the apology. Thank you for saying that, I said carefully, but I'm curious about the timing. It's been over a year since that meeting, 9 months since you left the company. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I needed time to process what happened, to recognize my part in it. He paused, and, if I'm honest, to get over my anger. I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. At me? At everyone. The board for removing me. The clients for leaving. The employees for what I saw as disloyalty. He shook his head. It took months of therapy to realize I was blaming everyone but myself. I studied him, trying to reconcile this seemingly self-aware person with the arrogant executive who had publicly humiliated me. What changed? I asked. Failure. His smile was rueful. The consulting work I mentioned, it's barely paying my mortgage. Turns out, when you develop a reputation for driving a successful company into the ground, demand for your expertise diminishes considerably. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. James had inherited a thriving business and squandered it through poor leadership and short-sighted decisions. But he had also inherited his father's expectations without his father's character or vision. Your father built something remarkable, I said. It couldn't have been easy stepping into his shoes. James looked surprised at the shift in conversation. No, it wasn't. He cast a long shadow. He stared into his coffee. I thought modernizing meant dismissing his approach. Relationships, creativity, integrity, I saw them as quaint, outdated concepts getting in the way of growth. They were the foundation, I corrected gently, not obstacles. I see that now. He met my gaze directly, which brings me to the real reason I wanted to meet. I have a proposition. My guard instantly rose. What kind of proposition? I want to come back, he said simply. Not as CEO or even an executive. Just somewhere I can contribute while learning how to lead properly. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. You want a job? At Hayes. He nodded. I know how it sounds. The former owner wanting to work for the person he once dismissed. But I've spent months watching what you've built from the ashes of my failure. You're doing everything I failed to do, balancing tradition with innovation, valuing both relationships and results. The cafe seemed suddenly quiet, the ambient noise fading as I processed his request. James Mitchell wanted to work for me. The man who had laughed at my ambitions now saw me as a mentor. Why would I consider this? I asked finally. You damaged client relationships that took years to build. You drove away talented people. You nearly destroyed the company your father entrusted to you. All true, he acknowledged without defensiveness. And that's precisely why you should consider it. I know exactly what not to do. I've learned the hardest lessons possible about leadership. And he hesitated. I still have relationships that could benefit the company. Family connections, old school networks that could open doors. It was a bold proposal, one that required either tremendous humility or desperate calculation on his part. I wasn't yet sure which motivated him. This isn't a decision I can make unilaterally, I said. We've built a collaborative leadership structure. Any addition to the team, especially one as complicated as you, would need broad support. He nodded. I understand. All I'm asking is that you consider it. I'll discuss it with my partners, I promised, though I already anticipated their reactions. Zoe would be vehemently opposed. Maria might see potential value in the industry connections. Our financial director would weigh the risks against possible benefits. As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, James asked one last question. Off the record, Do you ever regret how things turned out? Not for me, but for you. Taking on all this responsibility instead of enjoying the freedom of your own small consultancy. I considered his question carefully. No, I said finally. I don't regret it. The past year has been challenging, yes. But it's also been the most professionally fulfilling of my career. Because you proved me wrong. His tone was curious rather than defensive. Because I proved myself right, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. There is indeed. He extended his hand again. Thank you for hearing me out, Catherine. As I watched him walk away, I reflected on the strange path that had led us both to this moment. When I had left Mitchell Media, I'd never imagined returning as its owner. When James had dismissed my ambitions, he couldn't have conceived of seeking employment from me. Life's reversals rarely announce themselves in advance. Back at the office, I shared the conversation with my leadership team. As expected, reactions were mixed. Absolutely not, Zoe said immediately. He's desperate and looking for a lifeline. The moment he gets back on his feet, he'll revert to type. His connections could be valuable, Maria countered. And there's something to be said for the symbolism of his return in a subordinate role. The prodigal son narrative. Our financial director, Amara, approached it from a risk management perspective. What's our exposure if we bring him in? Would former clients who left because of him be alienated all over again? Would it undermine the culture we've worked to build? All valid concerns. As we debated, Robert Chin called, having somehow heard about James's proposal through his industry contacts. Before you make any decision, he cautioned, remember that people rarely change fundamentally. They may adapt, learn new behaviors, recognize past mistakes, but their core tendencies usually reassert themselves eventually. His words resonated with my own reservations. While I believed in second chances, I also believed in protecting what we'd built. The company culture we'd created, collaborative, client-focused, creatively dynamic, was still fragile. Introducing someone with James's history and personality might disrupt the delicate balance we'd achieved. After a week of discussion and careful consideration, I met James again, this time in my office. We've decided not to move forward with your proposal, I told him directly. While I appreciate your interest and the spirit behind it, the risk to our culture and client relationships is too great. He absorbed the news with a nod, disappointment evident but contained. I understand. In your position, I might make the same decision. That said, I continued, we would be open to exploring a more limited relationship. Perhaps a consulting arrangement for specific projects where your connections or expertise would be valuable. It wasn't charity. There were certain doors within traditional industries that remained closed to us, doors that James's family name and connections might help open. A structured, limited engagement would allow us to leverage those benefits, while minimizing exposure to potential disruption. I'd be interested in discussing that, he said, his expression brightening slightly. We outlined parameters for a potential consulting arrangement, clearly defined projects, performance metrics, ethical guidelines. By the meeting's end, we had a framework that both protected our company and offered James a path to professional redemption. As he prepared to leave, James paused at the door. For what it's worth, Catherine, I'm glad it was you. If Mitchell Media had to be taken over, I'm glad it was someone who knew what made it special in the first place. The comment caught me off guard, its sincerity unexpected. Thank you. That means something. After he left, I stood at my office window overlooking the creative workspace we'd carved from what had once been executive offices. Teams collaborated at communal tables. Digital specialists worked alongside traditional copywriters. Former Mitchell employees, now indistinguishable from those who had joined through Hayes. Zoe joined me, following my gaze. Thinking about James? Thinking about journeys, I replied. His, mine, the company's. Having second thoughts about turning him down? I shook my head. No, it was the right decision. But I am reconsidering my perspective on what happened between us. She raised an eyebrow questioningly. For a long time, I saw our story as adversarial. James dismissing me proving him wrong by succeeding where he failed. That's pretty much what happened, Zoe pointed out. Yes, but framing it that way keeps me focused on him rather than on what we've built. I gestured toward the thriving workspace. This isn't just about proving James wrong. It's about creating something meaningful, something that reflects our values and vision. Zoe considered this, then nodded slowly. So it's not about revenge. It's about renewal. Exactly. The distinction felt important. James's failure created an opportunity. But what matters is what we've done with that opportunity. Rebuilding client trust, developing new talent, integrating traditional expertise with cutting-edge approaches. Speaking of which, Zoe said, the Pinnacle team loved the campaign concept. They've approved the full budget plus additional funds for the VR component Maria proposed. The news, further validation of our approach, warmed me. That's excellent. Let's gather the team to celebrate before the weekend. As we walked toward the open work area, an email notification appeared on my phone. The subject line caught my attention. Industry Leadership Award nomination. The email was from the Regional Marketing Association, informing me that Hayes Strategic Partners had been nominated for Most Innovative Agency Transformation in the annual Industry Awards. The nomination cited our successful integration of traditional strategic principles with emerging digital approaches and our dramatic turnaround of a struggling legacy agency. I showed the email to Zoe, who read it with widening eyes. This is huge, she said. These awards are actually respected, not just pay-to-play recognition. The irony, I mused, is that 2 years ago I couldn't even get invited to the ceremony as Mitchell's representative. James always attended himself, despite knowing little about the creative work being recognized. Zoe laughed. Well, the tables have certainly turned. Indeed they had. As news of the nomination spread through the office, I was struck by how complete the reversal of fortunes had been. From being dismissed as too old to start over, I now led an award-nominated agency that had rescued and revitalized the very company that had discarded me. If there was a lesson in the journey, perhaps it was this: experience, when combined with adaptability, creates resilience. James had seen my age as a liability because he equated youth with innovation. What he failed to understand was that true innovation comes not from rejecting experience, but from applying it in new contexts, with fresh perspectives and open-minded collaboration. The email confirming our presence at the awards ceremony arrived later that afternoon. It included an attendee list for the gala dinner, a who's who of regional marketing leadership. Among the names of agency heads and marketing directors, I noticed James Mitchell, independent consultant. I smiled at the contrast with my own listing. Catherine Hayes, CEO, Hayes Strategic Partners, formerly Mitchell Media. 2 years earlier, those roles had been reversed. 2 years earlier, James had laughed at my ambitions and dismissed my potential. 2 years earlier, I had walked out of Mitchell Media with nothing but a box of belongings and a determination to prove him wrong. Now I owned his company. More importantly, I had transformed it into something better than it had been under either his leadership or his father's. A place where experience was valued, innovation was constant, and collaboration across generations created work that exceeded what any individual could produce alone. As I prepared to share the nomination news with the full team, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass wall of the conference room. At 55, the signs of age were clearly visible, the silver threading through my dark hair, the lines around my eyes, the experience etched into my expression. But so too was something else, the confidence of someone who had faced dismissal and turned it into determination, who had transformed rejection into renewal. James had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps his greatest miscalculation was failing to recognize that it's never too late to start over. That sometimes starting over isn't about leaving everything behind, but about carrying forward what matters while shedding what doesn't. That age and experience, far from being liabilities in a changing world, can be the very foundations upon which the most meaningful transformations are built. Ready? Zoe asked, holding the door to the main work area where our team had gathered. I nodded, stepping forward to address the company, my company, with news of our recognition and my vision for where we would go next. More than ready, I replied. In fact, I think we're just getting started. The room erupted in applause as I shared the nomination news. Looking at the faces before me, young and old, new hires and veterans, digital natives and traditional strategists, I saw not just a company that had survived against the odds, but one poised to thrive because of them. James's dismissive laughter had faded from memory, replaced by the sound of celebration, collaboration, and possibility. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't owning his company. It was transforming it into the kind of place where no one would ever again be told they were too old to start over.